What is the extent of our national territory? This question must be answered first as a prelude to our discussion on the second characteristic of Philippine criminal law, which is the principle of territoriality. What is this principle of territoriality? The principle of territoriality simply means that penal laws of the Philippines are enforceable only within its territory. For example, if X kills Y in the US, X cannot be penalized here because the crime was committed outside of our territory. This is so even if both X and Y are Filipinos. What is then the extent of our Philippine territory? Article 1 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution states that, and I quote, "The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines." The national territory of the Philippines therefore comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains. When I say aerial domain, it means the airspace above the land and the waters of a state. By the way, an archipelagic state like the Philippines is composed of a group of islands forming a single unit. The waters around, between, and connecting this group of islands form part of the internal waters of the archipelagic state. Under the archipelagic doctrine of territoriality, the Philippines has exclusive sovereignty and jurisdiction over all these islands and bodies of water around, between, and connecting this group of islands. Philippine penal laws therefore apply whenever a crime is committed within the archipelagic state like the Philippines. Now, I'm showing to you a map of our beloved Philippines, surrounded by several lines. Some are rectangular lines, diagonal lines, and these lines are of various colors. What do you think these lines are for? By the way, they are imaginary lines. Now, all the islands and bodies of water inside that imaginary blue line form part of the Philippine archipelago over which our government exercises exclusive sovereignty and jurisdiction. Now, how did that imaginary blue line come about? This is based on Republic Act 9522, which amended Republic Act 3046, the law that mandated the drawing of straight baselines in order to delineate the extent of our territorial sea. The enactment of Republic Act 9522, in turn, was in compliance with the Philippines' obligation under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the third UNCLOS, which is a multilateral treaty regulating sea use rights over the following maritime zones: the territorial waters, which is 12 nautical miles from the baselines; the contiguous zone, which is 24 nautical miles also from the baselines, and the exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles also from the baselines. The baseline I am talking about is the blue colored line surrounding the Philippine archipelago, as what you see in the picture.
I am showing to you here a map of our beloved Philippines surrounded by several lines. Some are diagonal, some are rectangular, and represented in several colors. But first, I want you to focus on the imaginary blue line surrounding the entire Philippine archipelago, shaped after the Philippine archipelago. What do you think that line is for? That line is used to determine the extent of our territorial sea. That is the only way by which to determine the extent of our territorial sea, because the Philippines is an archipelagic state, which is a state composed of many islands. And under the doctrine of, or under the archipelagic doctrine of territoriality, an archipelagic state must be considered as a single unit. Kasi pag hindi mo kinonsider na single unit, ang mangyayari, kada isla or kada island, you will have to draw separate baselines. And that would be absurd, because the state is considered as one single unit. It cannot be considered as separate states. And it would be easier, of course, to determine the extent of the territorial sea if the archipelago or if this group of islands is considered only as a single unit. Now, paano naging ka-shape ito, no? Bakit pattern ito after the shape of the Philippines? This is so because, pursuant to our obligations under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have to use this straight baseline method of delineating the territorial sea. And this straight baseline method consists of drawing straight lines connecting the outermost islands of the Philippines without departing to any appreciable extent from the general direction of the coast. That is why the straight baselines are shaped similar to the Philippine archipelago. And it is from this baseline by which we can now determine the extent of our territorial sea, which is 12 nautical miles from that baseline. And for purposes of criminal law, all the islands and bodies of water inside that imaginary blue line form part of the Philippine archipelago over which the Philippines exercises sovereignty and jurisdiction. The national territory of the Philippines is also comprised of all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. When Spain ceded the Philippine Islands to the United States pursuant to the Treaty of Paris of 1898, the two countries delineated the extent of Spain's territory by drawing an imaginary rectangular line. The rectangular line colored black you see in the picture, such that all those found within the said treaty line was what Spain ceded to the US in the amount of 20 million US dollars. Unfortunately, this was a mistake because the drawing of such rectangular line did not include the Scarborough shoal, locally known as Bajo de Masinloc, which is located just outside the treaty line. I am referring to that small dot pointed to by that blue-green arrow in the picture, as well as the Kalayaan Island Group, or more popularly known as the Spratlys. I am referring to that group of islands enclosed by that green line below the Scarborough shoal. Now, this error of not including the Scarborough shoal and the Spratlys was eventually corrected in 1900 when the US and Spain signed another treaty, the Treaty of Washington, wherein Spain clarified that it had also relinquished to the US all title and claim of title which Spain had to any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago located outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris. These territories lying outside the said treaty line included the Scarborough shoal and the Spratlys Islands, or the Kalayaan Island Group. Question: what is our basis for saying that the Scarborough shoal and the Spratlys were already part of the Philippine territory at the time Spain ceded the Philippine Islands to the US? The basis here is the 1734 Murillo Velarde map of the Philippines, which is the official Spanish government map showing the extent of Philippine territory during the Spanish regime. I am referring to the map shown at the right side of your screen. And as you can see, there are two arrows there. The arrow at the top points to the Scarborough shoal, while the arrow below points to the Kalayaan Island Group, or the Spratlys Islands. So as early as 1734, these islands were already considered part of Philippine territory, which were under the control of Spain at that time. Another question: what about Sabah? Is Sabah part of Philippine territory? Sabah is located at the northeastern tip of Borneo, as what you can see in the picture, and lies about 500 kilometers from the Philippines. Although Malaysia controls the said territory, the Philippines has laid claim over Sabah since 1961. Let us go through some historical dates here. In the early 1500s, Sabah was originally ruled by the Sultanate of Brunei under the rule of Sultan Bolkiah. In 1658, Sabah was ceded to the Sultanate of Sulu as a gift for helping the Sultanate of Brunei settle and suppress a revolt. In 1878, a contract of lease was entered into between the Sultanate of Sulu, which controlled Sabah at the time, and the British North Borneo Company. Under the agreement, the British Company could occupy the eastern half of Sabah indefinitely, as long as it paid a sum of money to the Sultanate in the amount of $5,000 annually. In 1946, when World War II ended, Sabah was handed over by the British Company to the British government and was made a crown colony of the United Kingdom. In 1962, then President Diosdado Macapagal filed a claim over Sabah against the UK, which had possession of the said territory at that time. That was the first official attempt by the Philippines to claim ownership of Sabah. Now, in 1963, in a referendum, the people of Sabah, however, voted in favor of joining the Federation of Malaysia. So yung mga constituents ng Sabah, yung nakatira dun sa Sabah, they chose Malaysia. Or rather, they chose to be part of Malaysia and not the Philippines. Both Malaysia and the United Kingdom regarded the contract between the Sultanate of Sulu and the British Company as a sale of land. The Philippines, however, maintains its territorial claim over Sabah based on that 1878 lease treaty and based on the historical account that Sabah is a gift from the Sultan of Brunei to the Sultan of Sulu, which is now a region and part of the sovereign territory of the Philippines. So yung ini-insist ng Philippine government is that yung agreement that was entered into between the Sultan of Sulu and the British company was merely a contract of lease and not a sale of land or not a sale of Sabah to the said company. And that is the reason why the Philippines continues to claim Sabah as part of its territory. Our national territory also comprises the territorial sea. From the name itself, no, makikita mo agad na part yan ng Philippine territory natin. Saan ba yung territorial sea? Paano ba natin mahanap, no? Pinakita ko na in my previous slide yung extent ng territorial sea reckoned from the baselines, no? 12 nautical miles from the baseline. So, as you can see in the picture, everything from the baseline to a limit not exceeding 12 nautical miles is considered the territorial sea, where our country, the Philippines, exercises exclusive sovereignty and jurisdiction. These rights extend not only on the surface, but also to the seabed and subsoil, as well as the airspace. Also comprising part of our national territory are the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas under the territorial sea and under our internal waters or archipelagic waters. When you say seabed, it refers to the top surface of the earth in seas and oceans, also known as the sea floor or the ocean floor. So yung term na seabed, it is synonymous with the terms sea floor or ocean floor. Subsoil refers to everything beneath the surface soil and the seabed. The insular shelves refer to the submerged portions of an island, while the term other submarine areas refer to all areas under the territorial sea like the seamount, trough, trench, basin, deep, bank, shoal, and reef. Question: what about the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf, the high seas? Are these maritime zones still part of Philippine territory? My quick answer to that is no. As to why they are no longer part of Philippine territory, we will discover as we go through this and the succeeding slides. Let us start first with the contiguous zone. The contiguous zone extends up to 24 nautical miles from the baseline, as what you can see in the picture, or 12 nautical miles from the territorial sea. Although not part of the territory, the coastal state, like the Philippines, may still exercise jurisdiction to prevent infringement of customs, fiscal, immigration, or sanitary laws. Next is the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. The Exclusive Economic Zone extends 200 nautical miles from the baseline. Please refer to the picture at your right. In this zone, a coastal state like the Philippines has the exclusive right to exploit or conserve any resources found within the water or on the seafloor or under the seafloor's subsoil, engage in offshore energy generation from the waves, currents, and wind within the said EEZ, and establish and use artificial islands, installations, and structures, and conduct marine scientific research. Here, the coastal state only has law enforcement capacity to protect the above rights. Because when I say exclusive, no other state has the right to exploit the resources found within the exclusive economic zone. If some other state or if some other person exploits the resources found within the EEZ, then the coastal state like the Philippines has jurisdiction to enforce its right to the exclusive use of such marine zone or area. The continental shelf. The continental shelf is the edge of a continent that lies under the ocean, as you can see in the picture. Now, continents are the 7 main divisions of land on Earth. The continental shelf extends from the coastline of a continent to a drop-off point called the shelf break. From the break, the shelf descends toward the deep ocean floor in what is called the continental slope. Again, the picture shows what I am describing about. Even if the continental shelf is underwater, a continental shelf is considered part of a continent. The actual boundary of a continent is not its coastline, but the edge of the continental shelf. Now, the economic rights within the continental shelf extend only to non-living resources and sedentary living resources such as shellfish. It also allows the coastal state to build artificial islands, installations, and structures, lay submarine cables and pipelines, and conduct marine research. As with the exclusive economic zone, the coastal state only has law enforcement capacity to protect the above rights. What about the high seas? The high seas is the ocean surface beyond the exclusive economic zone. As the common heritage of all mankind, the high seas is beyond any national jurisdiction. All states, for that matter, can conduct activities in the high seas so long as they are for peaceful purposes such as transit, marine science, and undersea exploration. Since, as a general rule, our penal laws can only be enforced within Philippine territory, it is imperative that we are able to determine or ascertain what comprises our national territory. They are, to repeat, the Philippine archipelago and its internal waters, meaning everything inside the baselines, including the airspace above the said islands and waters. The Philippine territory, or our national territory, is also comprised of all those territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, like the Scarborough shoal, the Spratlys, and Sabah. Although, take note, these islands are disputed territories. But even if they are under dispute, as far as the Philippines is concerned, they are part of the national territory. Comprising the national territory is also the territorial sea, including the airspace above it, and the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas under the territorial sea and internal waters. Again, the contiguous zone, the exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf, the high seas, as well as the airspace above them, are not part of our national territory. Take note of that. Since they are not part of our national territory, we do not have sovereignty over these areas. At best, we can only exercise sovereign rights to exclusively fish and enjoy the marine resources in the contiguous zone and in the exclusive economic zone, including the continental shelf below the contiguous zone and the exclusive economic zone, for up to 200 nautical miles from the baselines. Of course, no country or state exercises sovereignty or sovereign rights in the high seas. Okay?